When we talk about Honda's legendary machines, perhaps the first thing that comes to mind is the high-revving inline-4 engines that once ruled both the streets and the racetrack. Or maybe it's the compact, durable, oil-tight twin engines, faithful companions in everyday life, or simply those practical, hard-working single-cylinder engines, machines built to get the job done. But what if I told you that the greatest engine Honda ever built wasn't any of those? That their true legend was a V4, a unique configuration, far ahead of its time and almost forgotten. This isn't just a story about engineering. It's a story about belief, about the drive to innovate, and a bitter lesson about the cost of being different. Let's explore how Honda created and then abandoned the most remarkable engine they ever made. V4, the bold engine. That time forgot. Now, Honda has built plenty of great engines over the years, no doubt about that. The inline fours, fast, fierce, and legendary. The twins, dependable, oil-tight, and built to run forever. But behind those crowd pleasers was something different, something bold, something that didn't quite fit in. It was the fifth. A four-stroke engine with a layout most folks weren't used to. Not quite a twin, not quite an inline four, but somehow a perfect blend of both. It had a unique growl, smooth power delivery, and torque for days, right where you needed it. It was compact, balanced, and surprisingly versatile. On paper, it should have been the next big thing. But here's the twist. It never caught on. Not with the masses. Not like Honda hoped. While other engines sold by the millions, the V4 quietly sat in the shadows, underappreciated, misunderstood, and eventually abandoned. And yet, ask the folks who've ridden one, really ridden one, and they'll tell you, it wasn't just good, it was magic. The V4 was Honda, reaching deep into its engineering soul, trying to build not just another machine, but a masterpiece. And for a while, they almost did. But that's where the story gets complicated. Because making something great is one thing. Keeping it alive, that's another story entirely. Let's go back to where it all began. The UJM era, when Honda was outpaced by its own formula. Back in the early 1970s, Honda was on top of the world. Their DOHC inline-4 engines were redefining what motorcycles could be. Fast, smooth, and dead reliable. The CB750 in particular was a revelation. It didn't just launch a bike, it launched a whole new era, the superbike era. But success has a funny way of turning into a trap. Other Japanese manufacturers, Kawasaki, Suzuki, Yamaha, they took notes. And soon, they were building bikes that looked and sounded a whole lot like what Honda had already perfected. 4 cylinders, overhead cams, electric starters, disc brakes. Same formula, different badges. That's when a new term started floating around. UJM, Universal Japanese Motorcycle. Now, it wasn't meant to be an insult. In fact, some folks used it with admiration. These bikes were fast, affordable, and reliable as a hammer. But to Honda, it was a slap in the face. The company that had invented the formula was now getting lumped in with everyone else. No longer the leader, just one of the crowd. And Honda didn't like that one bit. They didn't want to be universal. They wanted to stand apart. So they went back to where it all began. The racetrack. Not to follow, but to reinvent. They weren't just looking for another engine. They were looking for something radically different. Something so advanced, so futuristic, that nobody could copy it. What they came up with was unlike anything the world had ever seen. And it all started with a strange, wild, and brilliant idea: oval pistons. But that's a story with some hard lessons ahead. NR 500. When genius collided with reality. If Honda was going to stand apart, they needed to break the mold completely. And in 1979, that's exactly what they set out to do. Their return to Grand Prix racing would not be safe, or subtle, or familiar. It would be radical. And it came in the form of the NR 500. At the heart of this strange and beautiful machine was a 500cc V4 engine. But it wasn't just any V4. Honda's engineers had found a loophole in the rulebook. GP regulations limited the number of cylinders, but said nothing about the shape of those cylinders. So Honda got clever. They built oval pistons. Each cylinder was stretched out, more like a racetrack than a circle, allowing for 8 valves per cylinder. That meant a total of 32 valves in a 4-cylinder engine. Revving to a staggering 22,000 RPM with dual overhead cams, water cooling, and aerospace-inspired internals, the NR 500 was a technological moonshot. The chassis, a lightweight aluminum monocoque wrapped in sleek bodywork that looked straight out of a science fiction movie. On paper, it was brilliant, but on the track, it flopped. Power output was weak, just 80 to 118 horsepower. The bike was hard to service, fragile, and prone to failure. In Grand Prix racing, it never won a single race. Its only real victory? A domestic event at Suzuka in 1981, and even that came down to a clever pit stop strategy, not raw speed. Still, the NR 500 wasn't a waste. It was a statement, a warning shot. That Honda wasn't done dreaming. They were just getting started, bringing the V4 to the street, from the track to American muscle. The NR 500 might have failed on the racetrack, but Honda wasn't ready to walk away from the V4 just yet. They had poured too much time, money, and heart into the platform to simply throw it all out. So instead of chasing trophies, they pivoted and brought the V4 to the streets. But not just any streets. They were looking at America. This was the early 1980s, and muscle cruisers were all the rage. Big engines, bold looks, power you could feel in your chest. So Honda did something they'd never really done before. They went full-on American, with bikes like the V45 Sabre, the Shadow, and the mighty V65 Magna. And under those long, low frames beat the heart of a V4. These cruisers didn't have the fancy oval pistons or 22,000 RPM redlines, but they inherited the soul of the NR 500. Torque-rich, smooth, and surprisingly refined. The V65 Magna in particular was a beast for its time. Quick off the line, deceptively fast, and packed with a growl that turned heads. Honda had taken racetrack tech and repackaged it into a kind of American street brawler. And for a while, it worked. The Magna found a loyal following. The Sabre made a name for itself. The Shadow became a household name. But outside the US, the V4 Cruiser never really caught on. In Europe and Asia, tastes leaned elsewhere. Sales were inconsistent. Interest faded. And so, just like that, Honda's big V4 gamble was once again drifting toward the sidelines. But the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Interceptor era, high hopes, harsh lessons. By 1983, Honda was ready to try again. This time, they weren't chasing cruisers or building for comfort. They were aiming straight at the sport bike market. And the result was the VF750F Interceptor, Honda's very first production V4 sport bike. It was sharp, sleek, and packed with promise. The numbers looked good. 86 horsepower, a top speed around 140 miles per hour, chain drive, full fairing, and a stiff chassis that handled like a dream, for the time anyway. For a moment, it felt like Honda was back on top, but then the cracks started to show. The Interceptor had a fatal flaw: premature camshaft wear. Engines were failing, owners were frustrated, and Honda, known for rock-solid reliability, was suddenly on shaky ground. To make matters worse, Suzuki dropped a bombshell: the GSXR 750. It was lighter by a whopping 100 pounds, faster and more race-oriented than anything Honda had on the street. While the Interceptor still carried some touring DNA, the GSXR was pure track missile, and riders loved it. Honda scrambled to respond, releasing other V4 models like the VF500 and the VF1000R. But even the flagship 1000R couldn't shake the criticism. Wayne Gardner, a future world champion, famously described it as a marshmallow: software-heavy, disappointing. Just like that, the dream of a V4 sport bike dominance was slipping away. The technology was there, but the execution missed the mark. And in the world of motorcycles, that's all it takes. Still, Honda wasn't done trying. They just needed to go back to where it all started. Back to racing, back to the track. Racing rescues the V4. With the Interceptor's promise fading and its reputation on the line, Honda needed to course correct fast. So they did what Honda has always done best when backed into a corner. They went racing. But this time, it wasn't Grand Prix glory they were after. They turned their attention to world endurance racing, where reliability, torque, and consistency meant everything. And suddenly, the V4 began to make sense again. Honda enlisted Jerry Branch, a seasoned tuning expert, to breathe new life into the engine. Working on the RS series race bikes, Branch managed to push the V4's power to a solid 120 horsepower, a big jump from earlier attempts. But more than that, these engines delivered something riders could really feel: broad, flat torque curves that didn't fall off mid-corner, smooth, stable power across the entire rev range, and a balance that made the bikes easy to handle, even deep into a 24-hour endurance run. The RS 750R and RS 850 became proof that the V4 wasn't the problem. It just hadn't found its proper home yet. In the punishing world of endurance racing, the V4 showed its true strength: durability, rideability, and relentless consistency. And for the first time in years, Honda started to believe in the V4 again, not as an experiment, not as a gimmick, but as the foundation for something greater. The road forward wasn't going to be easy, but now, at least, it had direction. VFR 750, when Honda finally got it right. After years of chasing horsepower and fighting growing pains, Honda finally took a breath and changed course. Instead of going faster, they set out to build something better. In 1986, the result rolled onto showroom floors: the VFR 750F. It wasn't a rehash, it wasn't a compromise, it was something new, a true sport bike, born on the racetrack but made for the real world. The VFR was built directly off Honda's RFV 750 race machine. It came with gear-driven cams for perfect timing and a signature whine you could hear before you saw it. The 180-degree crankshaft delivered power in steady, deliberate pulses, what racers would later call Big Bang firing. Visually, it was elegant: clean red, white and blue livery at first, then solid white. No flash, no frills, just purpose. But it was on the road that the VFR really shined. It was stable, predictable, and according to many riders, it actually made you a better motorcyclist. This wasn't a machine that fought you, it worked with you. The VFR 750 is widely credited with creating a whole new category, the sport tourer, a balance of performance and comfort that didn't exist before. And unlike its VF predecessors, the VFR earned Honda something it hadn't had in a long time: respect. It became known as one of the most refined, reliable, and best balanced motorcycles Honda or anyone had ever built. Finally, the V4 had found its voice, and people were listening. VFR 800 and VFR 1200. When technology took the soul. The VFR 750 had struck a perfect balance: performance, comfort, reliability. So what did Honda do next? They started adding tech. Lots of it. By the early 2000s, the VFR had evolved into the VFR 800, now featuring VTEC valve timing, ABS, and eventually even DCT. Honda's dual-clutch automatic transmission. On paper, it sounded great. In practice, not so much. The VTEC system opened and closed valves based on RPM, but the transition was abrupt, jerky, especially in the middle of a corner. The bikes were heavier, more complex, and lost much of that effortless feel that made the VFR 750 so beloved. Then came the VFR 1200, bigger, heavier, and even more tech-laden. Sure, it had power. And yes, it was smooth, but it didn't feel like a sport bike, and it didn't feel like a VFR. Meanwhile, brands like Triumph and BMW were stepping up with lighter, sharper sport tourers that stayed true to the rider-first spirit Honda once championed. Loyal VFR fans, many of whom had been with the brand since the 80s, felt left behind. What once made the VFR special was fading fast. The V4 was still beating under the tank, but the soul, that was slipping away. A legacy on hold, and a future still possible today. The V4 isn't gone, not entirely. Honda still uses the configuration in MotoGP, powering the mighty RC213V, the same machine that carried Marc Marquez to championship glory. So the technology is alive. The engineering, better than ever. Meanwhile, brands like Ducati and Aprilia are proving that V4 engines aren't just for racing. They can thrive on the street too. Their sport bikes are fast, refined, and wildly successful. And yet, Honda has no V4 in its current consumer lineup, not a single one. That raises a question a lot of longtime riders have been asking for years. Why hasn't Honda brought back a real VFR 750? Not some 600-pound tech demo, but something small, pure, affordable, a true sport bike with the heart of a V4. Because here's the truth. The engine was never the problem. The V4 never failed. It was simply left behind. Today, it's still turning laps in prototype labs and race garages. But it deserves more than that. It deserves to be heard again, on real roads, by real riders. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late. It's not because Honda's V4 engine was weak that it disappeared. It's because people forgot the reason it was created in the first place. A machine that didn't need to chase the horsepower race, didn't need to show off with numbers, but only needed to deliver a pure, balanced, and distinct riding experience. The V4 was never meant to please the majority. It was made for those who understood and felt the true spirit of Honda. But sadly, it was Honda itself that gradually abandoned that spirit, turning an icon into something too heavy, too complex, and lacking soul. What about you? Have you ever ridden a VFR? Do you think Honda should bring the V4 back with a new sport bike, lightweight, compact, and true to its original character? Leave a comment below, because it's your memories, emotions, and stories that can help this legend live again. If you think this video was worth it, don't forget to hit like and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey, where the past isn't just retold, but truly felt through speed, passion, and nostalgia.